Hello everybody, welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walsh. Thank you so much for joining us here today. You are listening to Newsflash. Happy Friday and welcome back to the show. We thought we left. We are very much still here today. There are two big stories roiling the globe that everybody is talking about, at least around the world. And of course, that is the continuing conflict with Russia and Ukraine. We're going to talk about that second, but first, we're going to be talking about a story that you probably won't hear on mainstream media, but in my opinion is just as horrific. And of course, that is the continued conflict with Israel and Palestine, escalating yesterday in the Israeli murder of a journalist, Shireen Abu Akleh, from the network Al Jazeera. Today, her funeral was attacked. Her home was raided. We'll give you the full details and talk about what that means for the future of the Palestinian liberation movement, and of course, all that comes with it. And of course, we'll give you the latest on the Russia-Ukraine war as well, and talk about the latest on abortion rights. Give you the full rundown on the political world today. So that will be a pretty complete, pretty comprehensive show. Definitely with those Palestinian first and Russia story second. But it's good to be back. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Newsflash back Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for the summer and beyond. Alright, so we are obviously today starting with the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh from, of course, the Al Jazeera network. She was reporting yesterday, or a few days ago, in Jenin. This is the area, this is the place where it is kind of being covered up. We've seen a lot of kind of ridiculous attempts here. So as you know, there's let's start here with the beginning. So she was fatally shot, this is of course according to Electronic Intifada, during an Israeli raid in the occupied West Bank early Wednesday morning, causing shock and anger across Palestine and the wider region. So this was somebody who was very well respected, always made an effort to be close to the Palestinian people and, related their stories to at least the Arab world. And, she was just straight up shot. She was wearing a press vest and everything, reportedly by an Israeli IDF sniper, from long range. In a tragic and deliberate crime that violates all international law and norms, Israeli occupation forces assassinated in cold blood our correspondent Shireen Abu Akleh. It really is just an absolutely shocking crime. And there's been, it's bad because they've already made attempts to kind of obfuscate from it and not just take full responsibility from it, and brag about it to their Arab-hating population, which is a pretty substantial part of the Israeli population. Her death was announced by the Palestinian Health Ministry shortly after videos circulated online showing her limp body being carried to a car and evacuated. Really horrific stuff. Israeli apparently, so they initially blamed Palestinians for Abu Akleh's death, but later they walked back the claims. So the veteran correspondent was hit with a live bullet on Wednesday while covering Israeli raids of the city in Jenin, and was rushed to the hospital while in critical condition, according to the ministry and Al Jazeera journalist. She was a Palestinian with U.S. citizenship, wearing a press vest and helmet. When she was killed, she was 51 years old. She was shot near her ear. She should, and that's the thing. If it's just a Palestinian kind of stray bullet, this woman is wearing a Kevlar vest. This woman is wearing a bulletproof helmet, and all of a sudden the bullet just happens to end up in the ear. Just from a random Palestinian just happening, to go by, as they always do in the IDF version of things. Really kind of ridiculous situation. Just saying that, this shot hit right on the ear, with precision really only, possible from a sniper. Like the odds of, one random bullet, kind of, a loose Palestinian bullet, hitting this lady, which is what Israel has tried to say, And whenever there's a bomb, it's like, oh yeah, Hamas's bomb, that they tried to shoot at us, backfired, did 3 flips, and ended up landing on a Palestinian city and killing a bunch of civilians. Oops. Like, crazy how that happens. Like, Hamas is really bad, guys. Like, that is their number one kind of normal rhetorical go-to, and, here they are using it again. So she was a Palestinian, again, citizen, a Palestinian person with U.S. citizenship, again, wearing a press vest when she was killed. Dina Takuri says Shireen Abu Akleh's colleague and eyewitness, who was standing right by her, described how an Israeli sniper directly targeted her. They were both wearing press jackets and helmets. Shireen was shot near her ear, where the helmet didn't cover. This was a shot of extreme precision. Second journalist, Ali Samoudi, was shot in the back of the head, but is reported to be in stable condition. In interviews from his hospital beds, Samoudi insisted the journalist had been deliberately targeted by Israeli forces, and there was no fire from Palestinians at the time toward Israeli soldiers. Samoudi said that journalists were in an open area and would have been clearly visible to the soldiers. He said he could not see any Palestinian fighters or even civilians in the area, only Israeli soldiers, because, this was an active raid going on that they were covering. We were going to film the Israeli army operation, and suddenly they shot us without asking us to leave or stop filming. The first bullet hit me, and the second bullet hit Shireen. There was no Palestinian military resistance at the scene. And look at a very basic level. This is a clear crime. Just straight up like shooting someone, a civilian, a non-combatant in the head, without any kind of warning or anything. That in and of itself is a horrible crime. But if you think about what they're doing, she is there with a camera to film what they are doing in that village. And, now that their response is to just turn around and like shoot someone who's like just in cold blood, just casually, as they're carrying out their day-to-day military operations, it is a very dark sign for the things to come. Because if that's what they feel they need to do, just to casually just shoot people like that, who are positioned there with a camera, just, reflecting to the world what you are doing, and you feel the need to shoot them in the head, that is not a good sign by any stretch. So we're going to film they're going to film the Israeli operation. The first bullet hit me, the second hit Shireen. There were no Palestinian military resistance at all at the scene, said Samoudi. Shatha Hanaisha, I think that's how you say that. Another journalist who was right next to Abu Akleh also said there was no confrontations with Palestinian fighters, and the Israeli army said the journalists had been targeted. We were 4 journalists. We were all wearing vests, all wearing helmets. Hanaisha said to Al Jazeera, the Israeli occupation army did not stop firing even after she collapsed. I couldn't even extend my arm to pull her because of the shots. The army was adamant on shooting to kill. This is a journalist who was there on the scene. An Al Jazeera person broadcast a video of a person wearing a bulletproof vest marked press and a helmet lying motionless on the ground, which it said showed the aftermath of Abu Akleh's killing. We'll play that. This is what it sound like. This is I think we're still on Arabic, so I don't think we will be able to, understand it here in the West as a non-Arabic speaking audience. I'm assuming most people listening to this would be. Another person wearing the same type of gear continued crouching nearby as Palestinians approach to render assistance. So that could have been Shatha Hanaisha trying to help her and pull her away, but she was unable to because she was literally firing away at the time. Just absolutely crazy stuff. Israel acknowledged that its soldiers were engineering the Jenin refugee camp. Again, going through what is a refugee camp, raiding this refugee camp, looking for what it called, quote, terror suspects. Near daily raids by the Israeli occupation forces across the West Bank. These are people who have been kicked out of their homes already by these Israeli settlers and are now just out in these kind of makeshift refugee camp type situations. Now looking for, subject to the Israeli army looking for terror suspects. Tel Aviv going on the offensive immediately, denying responsibility for Abu Akleh's death. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett issued a statement asserting It appears likely that armed Palestinians who were firing indiscriminately at the time were responsible for the unfortunate death of a journalist. According to Israel journalist Barak Ravid, Bennett based his claim on a video that was filmed by Palestinians and shared on social media. In the video, a voice can be heard in Arabic saying, "They've hit a soldier, he's lying on the ground." So this is him reporting it. Writing, Bennett based his claim on this video that was shot by a Palestinians and shared on social media. In the video, a Palestinian gunman says, "We hit a soldier, he's lying on the ground." So, however, the video clearly does not show any shooting or any person who has been shot. The context, narrow alleyway, looks very different from the open area that Abu Akleh shot in the video that Al Jazeera played. It's unclear if it even refers to the same incident. And they've done this before. The IDF has literally done this before, just putting in random times, like completely random situations from other instances to set people up and make accusations that are untrue and unfounded to cover up their own crimes. So the Israeli Foreign Ministry shared another clip showing a man firing an automatic weapon in a narrow alleyway. The ministry repeated the claim that Palestinians firing indiscriminately are likely to have hit Abu Akleh. The subtitles in the Foreign Ministry video do not match its audio, but appear to have been taken from the video shared by Ravid. So they're just mixing and matching at this point. It's like the Israeli army, again, they also shared the same video. Nothing in the video appears to connect them to the death of Abu Akleh. Israel's immediate goal appears to have been blown enough smoke to avoid damaging headlines and so doubt what happened. So pretty much saying, if there's a bunch of people, associated with Israel and the Israel government saying, it appears likely, look at this video and this translation, it's completely accurate. Look what's happening here. Check out this video. If you look at enough social media captions that say, this was happening and it was likely that this happened. People aren't going to sit through and watch the whole video and analyze it. And people, there will be enough cover. There's going to be enough tamping down on the outrage to, avoid this whole situation. It's really quite insidious here. Israeli human rights group B'Tselem said its field worker in Jenin documented the exact location in which the Palestinian gunman depicted in a video distributed by the Israeli army fired, as well as the exact location where journalist Shireen Abu Akleh was killed. Based on this investigation, the group concluded the video of the Palestinian gunfire distributed by the Israeli military cannot be the gunfire that killed journalist Shireen Abu Akleh because they are in two different places. This is the Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem. Israel has a long history of using fake videos, images, or ones taken out of context to evade responsibility for its actions. All you got to do there is just, Google in the right places. Israel walked its back its accusation against Palestinians later on, with its army chief Aviv Kohavi asserting that at the moment it's not possible to determine from which fire Abu Akleh was killed. So they're already walking the situation back quite extraordinarily. Kohavi said the Israeli army, they're going to hold a self-investigation to clarify the facts and present them in full and as soon as possible. It's it's so good to know that. So this is really kind of a ridiculous situation. And now the best part is the same Twitter account, the Israeli Foreign Ministry, that put out that completely false video of the Palestinians supposedly shooting the journalist Abu Akleh, is now tweeting, there was no claim that the gunfire in the clip killed journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. Rather, that Palestinian terrorists were firing indiscriminately and that they identified shooting down someone who looked to them like a soldier, i.e. perhaps wearing a helmet and a vest. And then we get to the tweet before. The video shows Palestinian journalists firing indiscriminately and likely hitting Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. That is from the embassy of Israel. So, again, just blatant lying, just, we did this, now we're doing that. It's quite incredible. Itamar Ben-Gvir, a far-right Israeli lawmaker, then he pretty much said the quiet part out loud. When terrorists fire on our soldiers in Jenin, they must return the fire with full force, even if they are, quote, journalists, in the area from Al Jazeera who often deliberately stand in the middle of battle and disturb the soldiers. So that's what's going on there. It just any justification these people will make, any excuse that they can think of, they will do it because they do not really. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you can see the quote journalists. They don't regard these people as on the same level. They regard them as in the way, and that this is really what they'll do to get them out of the way. We're seeing it right here. So the U.S. has even called for an investigation on this, and I'm sure they'll be, absolutely thrilled to take whatever the IDF presents as gospel, but, it's a whole other situation. So the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Thomas Nod, said he was very sad to learn of the death of American and Palestinian journalist Abu Akleh. I encourage a thorough investigation in the circumstances of her death and the injury of at least one other journalist today in Jenin. This general tone contrasts with how the U.S. officials reacted in March when American filmmaker Brent Renaud was killed in Ukraine. So you can kind of compare and contrast to the reaction, when an adversary does it. Although the circumstances of Renaud's killing were unclear, State Department spokesperson Ned Price immediately announced what he called a gruesome example of the Kremlin's indiscriminate actions. In February, the State Department called on Israel to conduct a thorough criminal investigation after Israel soldiers previously attacked Omar Assad, an elderly Palestinian-American man, leaving him dead. And again, I'm sure they'll be checking in any minute on the result of that investigation. I mean, it's just such a big joke. It is really kind of an incredible situation that, because they know they'll get no pushback from it. They know they're going to get no real anger that will actually force them to change away from the situation. But what they will get is some stern investigations and just a bunch of pissed off Palestinians that in the end nobody really cares about anyway, enough to stop them, or someone who has the power to stop them cares enough. Ron Kochav, another spokesperson for the Israeli army, told public broadcaster Can, "I don't think we killed her. We proposed to the Palestinians a swift joint probe. If we indeed killed her, we'll take responsibility, but it doesn't seem to be the case." And again, so what possible reason would Palestinians not have to trust an Israeli probe into them killing the Palestinian journalist? It's so crazy that they would be a little bit skeptical about that. In 2016, B'Tselem announced it would stop cooperating with the Israeli military investigations, which it termed a whitewash mechanism. And again, this is a well-respected human rights organization based in Israel, now saying that they don't trust the Israeli military to conduct, fair investigations, and their history of lying, it should not be too much of a surprise. The renowned Israeli human rights group added that 25 years of fruitlessly filing complaints on behalf of Palestinians brought us to the realization that there is no longer any point in pursuing justice and defending human rights acts by working with a system whose real function is measured by its ability to continue to successfully cover up unlawful acts and protect perpetrators. Again, that's all it is. Right there, plain and simple. That is what the function of this is. It is to cover things up. It's not to reveal them. It's to keep the system, keep the settlers coming in, keep the expansion going, and keep people from not yelling at you about it as much as possible. That is their real job, to say the least, and they're pretty successful at doing it. So again, following news of her death, many social media users mourned Abu Akleh's killing as the voice of Palestine. It's really sad, really, really horrifying stuff. A Palestinian journalist who I really respect, although I'd not heard of Abu Akleh myself, some of the journalists I follow about Palestine, they were very much inspired by her. Dana Takuri, Palestinian journalist, writing, "I'm reeling from the news of the death of my friend and colleague Shireen Abu Akleh. It's an of responsibility in this case notwithstanding. Israel has a long history of killing and injuring journalists, attacking journalists covering the Great March of Return in 2018 when mass unarmed protests in Gaza that started in 2018. Two journalists, Yasser Murtaja and Ahmed Abu Hussein, were killed and dozens more were injured during its bombing campaign in Gaza just about 1 year ago, Israel deliberately targeted buildings housing dozens of local and international media offices. And again, that's another part of it. It's just it's like you're not going to be able to even see what I'm doing because you would like I don't want the world to know. Like if you're like that is a very dark thing to do. You know, people who are literally just standing there with a camera, and then you're saying no. Like it is very. And again, if she's shot with a sniper and she was shot as aggressively as the people again literally standing there, and the videos that prove what happened, if she was shot that aggressively in that Al Jazeera video, I think the message that it sends is, we know what you're trying to do. We know you're just standing there showing our crimes to the world, and we don't want to let that happen. And we're going to kill you for it, And nothing's going to happen to us. It's going to be completely fine, because it just serves more powerful people's interests to let Israel keep doing this. So Israel claimed Hamas military intelligence were using the building, but never offered any evidence. Like, this is when they bombed an Associated Press building last year. This again almost 1 year ago to the day, taking down the Al Jazeera and AP offices. Israel, which brags about its intelligence capabilities, later ludicrously claimed it had no idea major world media organizations were housed in that building. An Israel air raid also killed the journalist Yusuf Abu Hussein in his apartment in Gaza City. He was a popular broadcaster with the voice of Al-Aqsa Radio. Reporters Without Borders last May said it condemns Israel's disproportionate use of force against journalists who should under no circumstances be treated as parties to armed conflict. And last month, the International Criminal Court received a complaint alleging war crimes against journalists by Israeli occupation forces. So that's just some of what they're doing, because they have the precedent of this. They have a precedent of killing journalists and injuring them. They also have a precedent of lying about it. And it is, really quite clear. So let's get into this situation here about really placing some responsibility. So Israel's international friends, writing here, this is an electronic intifada, Maureen Claire Murphy writing on this. European North American Union officials condemned the killing of Al Jazeera reporter Shireen Abu Akleh while she was covering an Israeli military raid in the Jenin refugee camp in the occupied West Bank on Wednesday. Those supposed condemnations variably included vague calls for investigation and accountability without specifically naming Israel as the party, all but certainly responsible for Abu Akleh's death. Again, so they're saying, we're so sad to see the journalist, again, did we kind of eradicated in 2020 using the passive voice for things like, cop killings and things of that nature, when, a cop would just do a horrific, murder of a, unarmed young, black guy or something like that. Journalists would be, say, an officer has, a young black man has been killed unarmed in the proximity of an officer. He's been shot somehow. How did that happen? We have no idea. That is we are still have not gotten that memo on the journalism side of things. I could say very, very strongly, looking at the headlines yesterday for Palestine, just all this, journalist Shireen Abu Akleh was shot in the head, died yesterday. Was killed, never using Israel in the headline. And, when I start to see that, that's how I think it's going to change. But, boy, it has not changed yet. The UK, the US, and Canada have actively tried to undermine the investigation into war crimes from the ICC while the UN Secretary General and Middle East envoys have refused to endorse it, or any other accountability measure against Israel. A preliminary investigation by Al-Haq, a Palestinian human rights group based on autopsy results and eyewitness testimonies, concluded that Abu Akleh was killed by a bullet fire from Israeli soldiers. Soldiers had surrounded a home in the camp on the pretext of searching for wanted persons, according to Al-Haq, and were met with armed resistance. Abu Akleh was hit in the head by a bullet fired from the direction of the Israeli soldiers, who had full view of the Al Jazeera crew and not the resistance fighters, whose fire would have not been able to reach the journalists based on literally, where they were standing at the time. Another journalist, also Moody, was shot in the back of the head of the same incident. is reportedly in, Ali Simoudi talked about that. He's reportedly in stable condition. Al-Haq said Abu Akleh's killing may amount to premeditated murder due to the fact that, she was, clearly a pressed person, a civilian, not there to kill unarmed, wearing Kevlar and all that. Immediately after the killing, and before any preliminary examination was possible, Israel launched a public relations campaign distancing itself from any responsibility for Abu Akleh's death. The Tel Aviv Daily Haaretz reported that even though the military has yet to conclude its investigation, Israel is pushing the message that there are indications that Abu Akleh was killed by Palestinian fire. And of course, that's being picked up by a lot of these organizations, and people are seeing it and saying, oh, there might be some doubt. There might be some doubt. We can't be, definitive on something that we clearly know, the real way of how it went. The Israel released footage claiming to show Palestinian gunfire in the area where Abu Akleh was killed, though it was quickly debunked by B'Tselem, an Israeli human rights group, and ridiculed online. The ambiguity introduced by Israel's public relations blitz was enough to stick. However, the effort was a success, with news outlets privileging the Israeli government's line over the testimony of Abu Akleh's colleagues who survived the attack and said they came under Israeli fire. An unnamed Israeli official told Haaretz the spin campaign had already influenced leading news organizations, including the AP, Sky News, BBC, and the AFP. The official said that these agencies, which initially reported that Abu Akleh had been killed by Israeli fire, are now reporting the circumstances of her death are under investigation. They changed the headlines due to Israeli pressure. This, Israel coming out and saying, we're not sure, this is under investigation, it may have been this way, it may have been that way, and people are now switching their tunes in these big agencies. So there will be no credible Israeli investigation into Abu Akleh's death, as Israel's self-investigation mechanism only exists to shield the state and its personnel from international accountability. It is possible a low-ranking soldier will be slapped on the wrist, as has happened in a handful of other cases concerning the death of Palestinians at the hands of the Israeli military, but there will be no true reckoning for the authors of Israel's open-fire policy, which is exercised liberally against Palestinians living under military rule, guaranteeing the bloodshed will continue. So let's go to kind of another angle on this, and this is, of course, the U.S. They're the best friends of Israel, the true enablers, of course, the U.S. We are seeing a real, actual, attempt to cover up here. This is Ali Abu Nima writing in Electronic Intifada about this. So he tells Al Jazeera here, he's listen to him in a moment talk about this. The government's now shedding crocodile tears for Abu Akleh, especially the U.S., European countries, and the UK and Canada also have blood on their hands. While they're calling for an investigation, this is a ruse ultimately aimed at guaranteeing continued Israeli impunity. They know that the Israeli attacks on the media are nothing new, and they know that this is not going to be a real investigation, and that empowering Israel to do an investigation, a BS investigation on their military, is nothing new to them. Let's listen to a little bit of what Ali has to say.
Let's bring in Ali Abu Nima. He's director at Electronic Intifada, an independent online news publication focusing on Palestine. He joins us via Skype from Amman. Thank you for speaking on the program. We've heard from many Palestinians in the last 2 days who say they have no faith that there will be any accountability for Shireen's death. Do you think they're right?
Sadly, I do. But let me just first offer my condolences to everyone at Al Jazeera for the loss of Shireen Abu Akleh. She was an icon and a model, not just for Palestinians and not just for Palestinian journalists, but for all journalists who take their profession seriously. So we all feel this loss tremendously. And we all know that the reason there will be no accountability is because there is no precedent for accountability. It's just not part of Israel's occupation. And it's also much wider than that. It's not just because Israel ensures impunity for its soldiers. It's because the so-called international community, principally the United States and the European Union, but others as well, who fully support Israel, make sure that Israel is free of any consequences for its actions. And so I want to say that Shireen Abu Akleh's blood is just as much on the hands of the United States and the European Union and Great Britain and others, Canada as well, who stand in the way of accountability and arm and support the Israeli occupation that murdered Shireen Abu Akleh as it murders Palestinians almost daily.
That is Ali Abu Nima on Electronic Intifada there. And we continue to look at this entire situation. It's really an awful, awful situation. We are seeing, first of all, we had the funeral today, just this past day, for the journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. And, right as she was coming out of the hospitals, we try to, get a handle on this. This is kind of just coming in relatively recently. This is around 5 hours ago. This was happening. So they started to beat Israeli occupation forces coming out, literally just as the procession was about to begin from the hospital to the church, across the city of Jenin. This would be occupied East Jerusalem, where this is happening today. There's again IDF forces coming out, beating up people in the streets about this. This is how it sounded on Al Jazeera English.
Analyzed, I've looked at news throughout the world for decades, and I've never seen a scene like this. Look at that. Attacking innocent people, carrying a casket. I don't know what to say.
Yeah, I mean, you really do not see that every day. Like, this is just, complete and absolute shock, probably, and you have to assume, roiling the world. Really, just anyone who's paying attention to the situation. Like, I mean, if there's any doubt now, there's really any doubt that Israel's responsible for this. Like, how is this not complete conclusive proof? Like, if you're so sad that you killed this journalist, like, you should not be coming out with cops out in riot gear, or whoever these people are, IDF cops, whatever, same thing. Israeli police, willing to probably use the same amount of brutal tactics, just beating up with batons to this funeral procession, coming out, walking with the casket. Really, really horrific stuff.
I don't know what to say anymore. What are they expecting now? This is unbelievable. Unbelievable. Oh my God. Such disrespect for the dead and for those who are mourning the dead.
How is that a security
threat to anyone? How is that disorderly? Why does that require this kind of repression, this kind of violence on the part of Israelis? Analyze
the casket at one point almost falling over. The Palestinian flag draped on top of it, falling off. Just, they really had to fight to keep it up. Just the absolutely unimaginable fact that, they will not stop. Even in death, they will come after people who do this stuff. It's really incredible. This is another clip of Israeli occupation forces tearing down a Palestinian flag hoisted by mourners carrying the coffin of journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. Apparently that was what was causing their anger.
A Palestinian flag has been hoisted up. The car slowly makes its way through that packed crowd. The Israeli police are now moving in to remove that flag. The flag is still being waved. We're being pushed back. The Israeli police are
This is in a very tight area
now. I don't know if you can still hear me. I think you can. The Israeli police want to remove that Palestinian flag. The Palestinian flag is actually illegal to display. They pushed us back, but the car carrying that casket is still moving ever closer to the church. It's only a few meters up the road. The Israeli police, you can see they're pushing us back from this barricade.
Yeah, so they're absolutely just being pushed back. All symbols of kind of resistance, all symbols of sovereignty, even at a funeral for Palestinians, just are not acceptable and must be met with absolute violence. Just attacking the dead, attacking the mourners, just absolutely disgraceful. I mean, it's the real horror of it is, as her friend and colleague Diana Boutou said, I'm not sure actually about call it. I don't know if she works at Al Jazeera. So she said Shireen would not have been in Jenin if Israel was not in Jenin. Like she is there, and their crimes brought her there, and their efforts to cover up their crimes are what killed her. 1,000% here. And of course, luckily, finally, the moment arrived where the coffin of slain Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh arrived at the church for the funeral.
I can see the coffin now being carried into the church. You can see how packed it is and how many thousands of people there are along the route that there have been. Let's have a listen into what's going on.
There are no shortage of Palestinian flags waving in the church, but we've of course seen Israel is not above entering places of religion, but maybe if they're Christian, they'll let them be. So this is inside the funeral at that time, again, mourners, they're beaten, arrested. So all for raising the Palestinian flag in occupied East Jerusalem, a place where Israel is trying to take over and make it fully Jewish, fully Israeli, and assert their full control there. The Israel, beating up mourners, grabbing them by the neck there, really, really very tough stuff. So this is a colleague of Shireen, Stephanie Decker.
Even in her death, Shireen is highlighting the occupation, Israel's occupation of the Palestinian people. The flag has seemed to be such an issue since her death. They went into her house on the day she died, 3 police officers telling them to switch off patriotic Palestinian songs. Yesterday, as we were outside the church where there was a hall where they were receiving mourners, there was scuffles, altercations as they ripped down 2 very small Palestinian flags that had been put on the gate of the church. Today, it seems that the reason why they entered in riot gear the courtyard of the hospital was to remove the flag. It looks like Israel has an issue with trying, its sovereignty here seems to be, at risk, even though internationally recognized, of course. This is occupied East Jerusalem. This is internationally recognized under a UN resolution. But the images we've seen today, everyone has never seen anything like this before.
Yeah, really kind of a shocking moment there. Has to be for all the people involved. She was finally laid to rest. Israeli occupation force eventually allowed the family to drive the casket to a Catholic church in Old City, which is packed with mourners. Our murdered friend and colleague, daughter of Palestine. This is Adrian Finnegan paying tribute to Shireen Abu Akleh, who was killed on Al Jazeera.
She was shot in the head by Israeli forces on Wednesday morning while on assignment in Jenin for doing nothing more than her job. A veteran journalist and household name across Palestine and the Arab world, Shireen was a beacon that shone a light on all issues facing the Palestinian people. Her death has left a shockwave throughout Palestine and the world. Having reported for Al Jazeera for more than 20 years, Shireen was committed to her core to telling the stories of those who don't have a voice. A great storyteller for almost 3 decades, heard in every home in Palestine. Despite the many challenges of living and working under what is the longest occupation in history, Shireen never gave up on telling the truth. In essence, she was exactly what Al Jazeera stands for, the voice of the voiceless. And she embodied those values right up until the day she was killed.
Shireen Abu Akleh, what a tribute there. As apparently now Germany has come out and banned vigils in memory of the journalist killed by Israeli occupation forces. It's such a symbol, and no doubt, like actions like this will make her even more of one. Like this is going to be more of something that's going to turn her into more of a powerful figure, more of somebody who's going to be remembered. in this situation. I mean, I don't know if her religion, but I mean, if they're like, if she was Muslim and she was just not able to be like buried in or laid to rest, at the place of her religion because, that was not going to be okay for, Israel's religious, ethno-state goals. I mean, that's just another low, I think, for the nation that has already committed and really just embarrassed themselves so much in front of the world here today. I went a little bit longer on that than I expected, so we're going to end it there. But we'll be back covering all issues Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. This is Newsflash.